classroom. I'm Kathy Kay, and today we're going to answer the question, how do I take free relief? You'll also note that this is part one. There's a lot of different definitions and information and distinguishing factors that we need to know about so that we can move through this process accurately. So today we're going to take a look at number one, areas of the golf course. Number two, objects or conditions that would warrant free relief. We're going to take a look at a few examples of that. And then number three, the nearest point of relief and how we determine that. That's step one in taking that free relief. And we're going to see several examples of that as well. Number one, areas of the golf course. Let's take a look at this illustration that shows the 5 different areas of the golf course. Follow along on this illustration as we look at first the general area. It covers most of the course and is where a player's ball will most often be played until the ball reaches the putting green. It includes every type of ground and growing or attached object found in that area, such as fairway, rough, and trees. The balance of our 5 defined areas of the course are, number one, the teeing area the player must use in starting the hole that he or she is playing. Number two, all bunkers. Number 3, all penalty areas. And number 4, the putting green of the hole the player is playing. Being able to distinguish and identify which area of the golf course your ball lies in is important because different privileges or restrictions may apply. Number 2, objects or conditions. So let's refer to the rule book here. And this you can find in your handy dandy if you have a player's edition perhaps, the medium, or if you have the big one. It's rule 2.3. It's objects or conditions that can interfere with play. And here's what it says. Certain rules may give free relief. That is, relief with no penalty. Yay! From interference by certain defined objects or conditions such as, and did you hear that? By certain defined. So each one of these, and if you recall, as you move through your rule book, if a term is italicized, that means you can flip over to the definitions to see exactly what it is. So number 1 in these conditions is loose impediments. 2, movable obstructions. 3, abnormal course conditions, which are animal holes, ground under repair, immovable obstructions, and temporary water. And those are the examples of what we're going to look at today, those immovable obstructions. And just to finish out what 2.3 says, but there is no free relief from boundary objects or integral objects that interfere with play. So there's 2 more definitions that you can do as homework, boundary objects and integral objects, because they're stationary just as what we're looking at today, but you would not be granted free relief from those. Okay, so 2.3, that's where you can look up the definition of what objects or conditions you can get free relief from. Okay, let's take a look at some examples of what these immovable or stationary conditions or objects are that we would be granted free relief. Taken a look at some of those, let's move into step 1, the process of how do I take free relief. What is the first thing we need to determine? It is the nearest point of relief. And a saying that rules officials like to say is, it's the nearest, not the nicest. It's simply defined as the nearest. And we're going to take a look at some examples of how that differs for if you're a right-handed or left-handed player. But before we do that, again, back to the definitions in your handy rule book. Let's just take a look at what that says. Your reference point for taking free relief from an abnormal course condition is the estimated point where your ball would lie is. You're nearest to your ball's original spot, but not nearer to the hole than that spot. It's in the required area of the course. That's why we had to become familiar with the definitions and the 5 distinct areas of the course, because there's some restrictions on that. And then where the condition does not interfere with the stroke you would have made from the original spot if the condition was not there. And then it goes on to say that estimating this reference point requires you to identify the choice of club, stance, swing, and line of play that you would have used for the stroke. And we'll see that in the examples of when we're determining that nearest point. Okay, so here is my golf ball on this immovable obstruction, the cart path. So first thing I need to determine, with the club, I'm going to play my next shot with where my nearest point of relief is. So I'm just going to set my driver here, and I go to this side of the path, and they have it marked with this white line, so I have to be completely off. And here's my nearest point on this side. Then I need to come over here and audition. No closer to the hole. And you can see it's an awkward lie because I'm near this pine tree. Doesn't matter. So right here is my nearest point. Now we stand back where we can measure. This is clearly my nearest point of relief. Here we have Karen, a left-handed player. The ball is on the same place of the cart path, but you can see when she determines her nearest point over here to the left, it's much closer to that white line. She crosses the path, sets up, her feet are completely off, and determines her second possible nearest point. She takes a look and can clearly see that her nearest point is over on the friendly side. Here I come upon and find my ball on a drain grate. What should I do? Well, let's audition a few spots. Spot number 1, mark it with a T. Spot number 2, mark it with a T, each time making sure my feet and everything is avoiding interference from the obstruction. Now I stand back and look at all 3 positions and determine that spot number 1 was the nearest. Well, what have we here? About to take my stance. Oh, interfering with my stance is one of these sprinkler head sort of things. So I make sure that I'm completely off, mark my nearest point, audition a second spot, and now I need to determine which of these is the nearest to where my actual original ball lies. I stand back, I take a look, I measure, and determine it's spot number 1. Let's work now to determine the nearest point of relief for this ball that's located on a cart path. 2 spots have been measured where the player has taken complete relief, one on the left and one on the right. We can stand back and easily determine that our nearest spot, that ball, or that spot I should say, which is closest to where our original ball lies, is the spot on the right. Now we get to look at an important distinction. The 2 locations for where the player found complete relief left and right of the cart path have not changed. The only thing different here is the location of where their original ball is lying on the cart path. Now, again, we stand back and look, and it's easy to determine that the nearest point, that location that is closest to where our original ball lies, is over on the left-hand side of the cart path this time. Yes, rare, but it does happen. Here you can see that our spots that we've determined for complete relief left and right have not changed, but the location of the ball on the cart path has. And when we stand back to see which one is nearer to that original ball, they are equal. And when that is the case, the player simply gets to choose which side they prefer. Yay! Remember, nearest does not always mean nicest. Here you can see the original ball was found to be on the cart path, an immovable obstruction for which you are entitled to have free relief. It is not mandatory, however. So when you discover that your nearest point of relief is left of the path on that dirt spot where you may not be able to take a stance because of that tree is there, or it could interfere with your swing, you might decide to just play your original ball as it lies, even though it is on, in this case, a cart path. It could be some other sort of immovable obstruction. I would recommend, just as shown in the previous pictorial examples, where the original ball is still in its original location, while you determine, for example, on both sides of that cart path, what complete relief looks like. Because if a spot to the right doesn't look attractive and a spot to the left doesn't look attractive, they're both as ugly as, or not nice, shall we say, as what is pictured here, you may just decide to play it as it lies. If you did pick it up from the cart path and then you determined that both locations were not favorable, you can replace it and play from the original location. The consequence, however, is that you have touched your ball in play and you would incur a one-stroke penalty. So again, leave that original ball in its spot until you're absolutely certain that you want to take relief. Let's take a look at where I discover the consequence of having picked up my ball before determining what the nearest, and definitely not the nicest, point of relief was. So, a quick recap of what we looked at today in part 1 of How Do I Take Free Relief. We took a look at the definition and the illustration that taught us what the 5 areas of the course are. And we learned that why it's important to know that is because different areas of the course allow special privileges or have different restrictions. We took a look at some objects or conditions, focusing on the abnormal conditions, those immovable objects where free relief would be granted. And then we learned about the nearest, not the nicest, but the nearest point of relief, which is step 1 in the process of taking free relief. Tune in to part 2, where we're going to move on from our nearest point of relief, where we determine our relief area and then the process for getting our ball back in play. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.